Hey everyone, welcome to Friday, day 5, week 7. So we're finishing up our week about color and, we're using our art materials as an excuse to speak about that color. So we've talked about our white pigments on Monday, then we talked about the yellow pigments on Tuesday, red pigments on Wednesday. Yesterday we talked about earth tones, specifically my favorite earth tone, at least for, years. Has been raw umber, and today we're going to speak about blues. So we finished with our blue hue, and by the way, this week we've painted from life this whole week. So always put a time in your life. It can be an hour a day, it could be an hour a week, it doesn't matter. But if you can try to paint from life and balance out, if you work from photographs, if you work from imagination, but just go back to the well and paint from life from time to time. It's always like the best learning experience. So let's speak about those blues and let's tackle that blue painting. Bye. See you next week. Next week, whole new theme. It's gonna be drawing. I was gonna hint at it with the object that I'm gonna paint today, but it's gonna be colored pencil drawing. So I'll see you next week. Bye. Okay, Friday, our last day. Let's get started. This is the last day we're gonna paint our materials or tools that we usually have in our studio, and where we use them as an excuse to reflect upon the colors that we use in our palette. For today, I wanted to do just this very, very sort of cute little tightly designed painting of just a regular pencil sharpener. And the reason I thought it was very nice that I picked this really, really kind of crappy pencil sharpener is because it is an absolutely necessary tool if you are drawing with regular pencil or color pencils. And I have been using color pencils for the last, I don't know, maybe 3 years. I have to be super honest. I think I used them when I was in kindergarten and then never used them again and then picked them up about 3 years ago. And it was amazing. It was awesome to understand them once again as tools that would bridge the gap between drawing and color. One of the things that I just really, really disliked was that I had no ways of sharpening my pencils. I did if I was doing a very traditional way of using a blade and just sharpening by hand. And I know that's probably the right way to do it. I was actually taught how to sharpen a pencil traditionally. I spent like a whole class. I think it was about 3 hours in a class, just somebody showing me how to sharpen a pencil and a charcoal pencil. So I know how to do those things properly, but I just don't have the discipline to be 100% honest to do that constantly. So what I always end up doing is I just buy sharpeners wherever I can get them, which means that I get super crappy ones like the one I'm using today, which I actually think I might have just kept from my brother when I went to visit him, because I was doing some drawings for some portraits of my niece and nephew, and I was doing the underdrawing, and I've been doing this thing where I do the underdrawing in a water soluble color pencil. The reason I do this, to be super honest, is because I found a nice Faber-Castell color pencil set in my mother's house, and it used to belong to my niece, and she wasn't using it anymore, or that's what I told myself. And I started using those, and I was like, oh, these are super nice. They're actually softer than the waxy, non-water soluble regular color pencils. So I started getting used to them being soft, and I like them now. I actually super like them now. And those were the ones that I used for rewards for the book that I put out. And I've been using them since. I love them as a tool for drawing. They really do feel a little bit different than using regular graphite or charcoal for doing the underdrawing for a painting. So this was the sharpener that my brother gave me, so I'm guessing it was probably my nephew's. And I think I kept it. I mean, I didn't mean to keep it, I meant to keep my niece's color set. But this one, I didn't mean to keep it. I just think I put it in my bag and I realized I had it when I got here. But this is the one that I've been using, and it's terrible. I mean, it's ruining all my color leads. But again, it's fine. And the real reason I thought it would be a lot of fun to use it to speak about the blues in my palette is because I mostly use ultramarine blue. And that may not mean such an important thing nowadays, because saying ultramarine is like saying, yeah, I use just a regular kind of workhorse blue violet. And you can go to a store and you can buy any brand of ultramarine blue, and it's usually not very expensive. I mean, you could probably get away with just using just regular student grade. I hate to say student grade, but that's how these houses, these companies that produce paint, they call cheaper paint, which is not cool, by the way. Totally not cool. They should change the way they describe that paint. But I use the cheaper pigment, and it's totally fine. And I've used, Old Holland, Rublev, ultramarine blue, and I know it's more saturated, and I know there's a difference, but I'm totally fine just using cheaper blues. But my point is that nowadays it's super easy to go to a store and just buy blue. And if you want ultramarine blue, it's probably like one of the cheapest blues that you can get. The thing is, ultramarine blue, which was made like around 1830s, mid 19th century, was actually replacing lapislazuli, which is crazy, because that's the blue that was used in the Baroque period in the 17th century and late Renaissance also to paint. So it's one of those things that you anecdotally hear about, but this was actually a huge deal. This was a semi-precious stone that was being ground up, that was imported from Afghanistan. It had to travel by boat from Asia to Europe. That's why it's called ultramarine, like it's beyond the sea. It came from beyond the sea. And it was insane. I mean, it used to be used to paint the holiest of things. We were talking about 2 days ago when we were talking about the reds, the carmines and the lakes, how carmines and lakes were used to paint the red robe of Virgin Mary. And for the blue robe, that was also what would characterize her. They would use this lapislazuli, this, semi-precious stone. I was trying to remember what book I saw this quote that Velázquez would pass to the church or, to his patrons or to the king when he was painting a painting where he would use lapislazuli. So he would put all the other colors in like a separate kind of list, and then he would quote the lapislazuli just to say, hey, a regular painting would be this expensive, but since you want me to use lapislazuli for either a sky or, again, like a blue robe, it's going to be this much more expensive. It really is like an x-ray of how pigments were understood initially, and it's quite beautiful. And I don't have an unwillingness to use more synthetic pigments or to use just really super crazy colors that are available nowadays. It's nothing like that. I mean, those hues and pigments that companies are making nowadays are absolutely beautiful. But there is such a thing as just recognizing that we come from a time where the most regular of colors, like blue, had to be interpreted through semi-precious stones that took titanic efforts just to get in your palette. That gave you a feeling of the weight that a color would have. If you had paint in your palette, it's not like we do nowadays. We just run to a store, or we just get in the computer, we buy it through Amazon, or we buy it in whatever art store we have nearby, and then we squeeze the tube and there's the paint, and that's it. That's all the pressure that we have when we use paints. But again, it was such a huge effort 400 years ago to have color in your palette that I think the appreciation for the color, the respect for the color, and just being, finding inventive ways to use the color was such a part of being a Baroque painter that I think that our sensibility as painters To find the biggest array of possibilities in color nowadays, I think we've lost that. I really do. I think we've become sort of lazy. I'm not saying that there's not incredible painters nowadays. I'm not saying that we don't have incredible colorists nowadays. I'm not saying that we don't have companies that go through great efforts to produce beautiful paint nowadays. No, all those things are true. But I do think we've become complacent as painters when we get color. We don't understand them as precious. And I'm not saying precious just because this was a semi-precious stone. I'm saying precious as wow, this is something special. And try to find the most possibilities. I really have to dig in deep and just squeeze every single possibility that this color has to offer to me, because those are my tools. I'm not saying that, old man yelling at the sky like, oh, before it was great and nowadays we're just lazy. But I just think we lost something. Part of our brain just kind of shut down a little bit just because color is easily available to us. It's expensive, yes, but it's not like, the expensive it was when Michelangelo had to order, kilos and kilos of lapislazuli to paint the sky of the Last Judgment. And he didn't care, of course, because the church was paying, so who cares? But it was that expensive. So I thought it was just very poetic to just speak about how a color that meant so much, that carried such weight, because it is one of the most important colors that we've used. So I thought that the grandness of the color, the preciousness of the color, the rarity of the color could be beautifully balanced by just painting this very cheap, available anywhere pencil sharpener that doesn't really work. It really doesn't. It's ruining all my pencils. It's poetic. It's just, this is what we are today. This blue thing exists because we have like such an array of blue dyes and pigments today that we can dye any plastic and we don't really care. I honestly have used ultramarine blue as my only pigment for many, many years. I would say probably over 15 years, maybe even more, maybe 18 years. I don't think I've used other pigments regularly in my palette. They can make a cameo and just be in little areas of paintings. But hundreds of paintings I've made just with ultramarine blue. I know that it is limiting because it is a very cool, transparent blue-violet, not super saturated. I mean, if you buy like more expensive ones, they are. And I know it is limiting if you want to do that. There's no way you can paint like a super nice summer sky, like a blue-green sky with ultramarine blue. It's not quite possible, really, because you can add yellow to it, but because it's a blue-violet and it has like a purple tint to it, as soon as you add yellow to try to make it like a blue-green, what you're doing, again, is adding yellow to a purple, and it's just complementaries, and it's just graying it out. But I started adding recently because I wanted just a little more saturation, and I just wanted something that was slightly warmer than ultramarine. I introduced Cobalt, and I think Cobalt is a really, really beautiful, beautiful color. I've been super happy with it. I know that Cobalt historically was actually in oil painting. It was used a little bit before ultramarine, so it was probably 19th century, but early 19th century. And I remember this from my history of illustration courses, that Maxwell Parrish used to glaze a lot of his skies with cobalt blue. And I can show some Maxwell Parrish images here, but honestly, if you've never seen a Maxwell Parrish painting in person, no image is going to do it justice. I don't care how HD it can be. It could be the resolution that you want. But because it's so heavily glazed, I mean, we're talking tens and tens of glazes. It is insane. It's probably like glazing, sanding. Those surfaces just capture light like I've never seen before. Never, ever seen before. It looks like a stained glass. It's that crazy. If you've never seen a Maxwell Parrish painting, really, and if you think that there's a museum nearby that has one, go immediately, because it is a very different experience from any other painter, certainly from any other illustrator from the time. it really is worth seeing. So I remember that from Cobalt Blue, and I'm loving it. I don't have it all the time in my palette. I only bring it kind of forward when I feel that I've almost like hit a wall with my ultramarine, and I just slowly add it to the mixes in my palette that have ultramarine. But that's it. I thought it was a very cool way to speak about how we come from a tradition of using this semi-precious stone that would come all the way from Afghanistan to Yves Klein just taking ultramarine, mixing it with some synthetic polymer and calling it Yves Klein blue. And nowadays, just knowing that we could use it to paint the most mundane and cheap of things, like this little tiny pencil sharpener. And it speaks a lot about the history and the availability of colors that we have nowadays. So that was it for this week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys can be inspired to look at your palette and to actually try and figure out why you have your colors in your palette. What happens usually is that we have the colors of the people that taught us how to paint. We are inheriting our teachers' palettes. That's what I did when I started to paint with Steve Vassell and Max Ginsberg. I was using their palette, but I never questioned their palette. What I was trying to do when I would use their colors, and I'm actually referring to these colors as their colors, was to mimic their use. So it's really limiting, because what I would do is like say, oh, we're painting the model from life. Max is using, let's say, Cinnabar Green Light and Cad Red to do that midtone for the shadow. So I'm going to mix that. And that's what you start doing when you're using other people's colors. You start almost creating recipes that work for them, but that they don't necessarily have to work for you. So my invitation is that you be honest with yourself and you start looking at your palette and just question if you really do know everything that you really need to know about each and every one of those colors that is in your palette. I'm not trying to make anyone feel guilty about buying very expensive, beautiful color. If you want to buy it, and if you want to put it in your paint box, and if you want to put it in your palette, that's fantastic. You have all the right in the world to do it. What I'm trying to do is to actually promote the consciousness of what we're using and why we're using it. And also, something that people don't realize usually is that if you have, let's say, 20 colors in your palette, and if you're doing a painting, and out of those 20 colors, you realize that you used 8 colors to do a painting, then your palette should be 8 colors. If you're using 8 colors and you're only using 6, then your palette should be 6 colors. And what I mean by that is that if at the end of a painting session, you're not using every single color in your palette, then don't put it in your palette. I know how it feels when we buy really nice, expensive paint and we squeeze it onto our palette, and then weeks go by and that thing has has dried up because we just didn't really use it, and then we feel like crap because we knew it was expensive and it's just sitting there. And then what's worse is that because we feel bad, we start just pushing ourselves to use it when we probably really don't feel like using it. So this week was just an excuse to reflect upon our palette and the use that we give it. And if you look at your palette and it has 20 colors and you just love your 20 colors and you think you use them fully and wholly, dude, more power to you. That's amazing. And you have way more ability than I do to mix color, because I wouldn't know what to do with 20 colors. Remember, next week, it's going to be a whole new theme. So thanks for hanging out this week, and I'll see you on Monday. Thank you. Bye.